the #1 New York Times best-selling series. Who is Bob Dylan? Who is Bob Dylan? On Mother's Day, 1946, a 4-year-old boy wanted to sing a special song to his grandmother. He had practiced it and now he was ready. But all the grown-ups in the room were laughing and talking. No one was paying attention to him. Finally, Bobby Zimmerman had had enough. He stamped his foot on the floor until all the grown-ups stopped talking. If everybody in this room will keep quiet, I will sing for my grandmother. I'm going to sing some Sunday morning. When he finished, the grown-ups clapped and cheered for the little boy. So Bobby decided to sing the only other song he knew. There was more applause and cheering from all his relatives. Bobby liked it. 66 years later, in 2012, President Barack Obama presented the Medal of Freedom to Bobby Zimmerman. By then, he was known as Bob Dylan. The Medal of Freedom is the highest award given to people who are not soldiers. The little boy had become one of the most famous singers and songwriters in the world. There is not a bigger giant in the history of American music, the president said. He is still chasing that sound, still searching for a little bit of truth. And I have to say that I am a really big fan. How did Robert Allen Zimmerman become Bob Dylan? Who is the real Bob Dylan? He is many things. A singer, a songwriter, an actor, an author, a filmmaker. Bob Dylan is also one of the most private people in the world. Unlike many famous people, he wants to keep who he is a secret. Chapter 1, Hibbing. Robert Allen Zimmerman was born in Duluth, Minnesota, on May 24, 1941. His parents were Abe Zimmerman and Beatrice Beatty Stone. In 1946, Bob's younger brother, David, was born. That same year, Abe Zimmerman caught polio, a disease that left him with a limp. Abe survived but was very sick for a long time. The Zimmermans decided to move to Hibbing, Minnesota. It was Beatty's hometown. Her family could help out while Abe slowly recovered. Hibbing was a small town in a part of northern Minnesota called the Iron Range. The mining of iron ore was the biggest industry. Abe ran a small furniture and appliance store there. When Bob Zimmerman was growing up in Hibbing, there were only 16,000 people living there. Everyone knew everyone else. No one wanted to stand out or be different. On Sundays, most families went to church. The Zimmermans were among the few Jewish families. Bobby Zimmerman studied Hebrew and was bar mitzvahed when he was 13. That is a ceremony that celebrates a Jewish boy becoming a man. But just 3 years later, Bob began to tell friends that he was not Jewish. He also began to make up stories about himself. He said he had run away from home many times. Not true. He said he had worked in a circus. Not true. Later he began to tell people that he was an orphan. Absolutely not true. Why did he make up these stories? Maybe he thought they made him seem more interesting. Maybe he had reasons for hiding his true identity. At 10, Bob decided to learn to play a musical instrument. His cousin gave him one piano lesson before Bob announced that he would teach himself. And he did. But what kind of music would he play? In the early 1950s, few teenagers in Hibbing listened to a new kind of music called rock and roll. The local radio station in Hibbing was, like the town itself, conservative and dull. None of the music it played appealed to Bob. At night he could listen to radio stations from as far away as Louisiana. He loved the mix of gospel music, blues, and black rhythm and blues. He heard music that he liked on TV, too. In 1952, Abe Zimmerman brought home one bib of Hibbing's first TV sets. Bob and his friends couldn't get enough of it. Soon they would be able to watch westerns like Gunsmoke and comedies like I Love Lucy and The Honeymooners. On Sunday nights everyone watched The Ed Sullivan Show, a tremendously popular variety show. Bob saw early like Bill rock groups Haley and the Comets and Elvis Presley. On September 9, 1956, one of Presley's first songs on The Ed Sullivan Show was Ready Teddy by Little Richard. Little Richard was a black singer. Bob had heard his hit song Tutti Frutti. Little Richard's pounding piano and wild screaming bowled Bob over. When he started playing piano, Bob copied Little Richard's stand-up style of playing. Early rock legends, the three most influential rock musicians of the 1950s and early 60s were Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Elvis Presley. Richard Wayne Little Richard Penniman was born on December 5, 1932, in Macon, Georgia. A great showman, he often played piano standing up, pounding on the keys. His hit songs include Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, and Good Golly, Miss Molly. He was heavily influenced by gospel music. This is the kind of music sung in African American churches. At one point he quit rock and roll and became a minister. Little Richard was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986 and the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2003. Charles Edward Anderson Chuck Berry was born on October 18, 1926, St. Louis, Missouri. Some of his most famous songs are Maybelline, Roll Over, Beethoven, Music, and Johnny B. Good. Rock and roll. His distinctive guitar playing has been imitated by almost every rock guitar player in history. His songs were so popular and so well known that he could play with a local band anywhere and be sure they would know his music. The Beatles played many of his songs in their early days. They put rock and roll music and Roll Over, Beethoven on their early albums. He was voted into both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1986. Early rock legends. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, on January 8, 1935. His family soon moved to Memphis, Tennessee, which was his home for the rest of his life. Every year hundreds of thousands of fans still visit his mansion, Graceland. Elvis first recorded for Sun Records in Memphis. Sam Phillips, Sun's owner, wanted Elvis to bring black rhythm and blues to white audiences. Unlike Little Richard and Chuck Berry, Elvis did not write his own songs. He played guitar on stage and is credited with making the guitar, and not the piano, the lead instrument in rock and roll. Until the arrival of the Beatles, Elvis was the most famous singer in the world. He died on August 16, 1977, at age 42. He, too, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986. Over 2.5 billion of Elvis's records have been sold worldwide. Elvis Presley. Chapter 2, A Cool Guitar. At about the same time he started listening to rock, Bob decided to learn guitar. His parents rented one for him. Bob taught himself to play with a book that showed the basic chords. He spent hours practicing and trying out different kinds of sounds. Soon Bob wanted a cooler and better guitar. He had his eye on a flashy guitar from a catalog. It was turquoise with a white wing painted near the strings and cost $39. That was a lot of money in the 1950s. He knew his parents would not understand why he wanted to spend so much money on a guitar. So Bob saved up $20 for the down payment. By doing this, he could take the guitar home. However, until he had completely paid for it, he kept the guitar hidden. Then he started playing it around the house. Bob's parents were impressed with how hard he'd worked to buy that guitar. In high school, Bob and two friends formed a band called the Golden Chords. There was a drummer and a guitar player, and Bob played piano. The Golden Chords soon split up, and Bob formed another band with 3 other boys. This new, nameless band had electric guitars and very loud amplifiers. When Hibbing High sponsored a talent show, Bob and his friends signed up. As soon as it was their turn, they turned the amplifiers as high as they would go. The music was so loud that no one could hear Bob singing. After just a few minutes, the principal cut the power. The nameless band left the stage. In high school, Bob was something of a loner. He kept to himself and seldom spoke up in class. Nor did he play any sports or join clubs, not even the school band. He preferred practicing his guitar on his own, or drawing and writing poems. Still, Bob found ways to be noticed. He talked his father into buying him a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Bob wore a black leather jacket and had a cute girlfriend who rode on the back of the bike while he roared around Hibbing. The girl's name was Echo Star Hellstrom. She was Bob's first real girlfriend. Echo's family was less well-off than the Zimmermans. Her family lived in a tiny house outside of town. Bob's family was middle class and had a nice house in a nice neighborhood. But Echo and Bob shared much in common. They both loved listening to the Louisiana radio stations late at night. Echo was as crazy about rock and roll and rhythm and blues as he was. Like Bob, she didn't fit in at high school. They both wanted to get out of Hibbing as soon as they graduated. Bob was already planning a new identity for himself. Changing his last name was part of the plan. Echo was the first person to hear his new name, Bob Dylan. There was a popular TV character called Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke. But Bob told people that he chose the name because he had an uncle named Dylan who was a gambler in Las Vegas. That wasn't true. There was no uncle named Dylan anywhere. A couple of years later, Bob changed the spelling of his new last name to Dylan. Some people thought that Bob had picked the name Dylan because of the famous Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. But Bob denied that, too. Like with so many other parts of the Bob Dylan story, he offered no explanation at all. In June 1959, Bob graduated from high school. Under his yearbook picture it said that his ambition was to join Little Richard. Bob Dylan's aliases. Bob Dylan has worked under many different names. Among them are Blind Boy Grunt Performer on the Broadside Ballads. Volume 1 Compilation Album, 1963. Bob Landy Played Piano on the Blues Project Compilation Album, 1964. Boo Wilbury Performer on the Second Traveling Wilburys Album, 1990. Elmer Johnson appeared in concert with the band, 1969, Elston Gunn piano player briefly on tour with Bobby V. Clay 1950s. Jack Frost producer of several studio albums, 2001 to 2012. Lucky Wilbury performer on the first Traveling Wilburys album, 1988. Robert Milkwood Thomas contributed piano and vocals to Steve Goodman's album Somebody Else's Troubles, 1973. Sergei Petrov, co-writer of the film Masked and Anonymous, 2003, Tatum Porterhouse harmonica player on Ramblin' Jack Elliott's album Jack Elliott, 1964. As a graduation gift, Bob got a collection of folk records. When he started listening to them, Bob came across a black folk singer named Hud Dye Lead Belly Ledbetter. Lead Belly's music amazed and excited Bob. He had never heard anything like it. Lead Belly had written hundreds of songs. Goodnight, Irene became a #1 hit on the radio in 1950 when it was recorded by a group of folk singers called the Weavers. The Weavers were a white group. Black musicians were not played on most radio stations. Lead Belly's main instrument was the 12-string guitar. Bob called a high school friend and said, "I've discovered something great." By this time Bob and Echo were no longer a couple. Bob had been seeing other girls.